I messed up tonight. I lost another fight. I still mess up, but I'll just start again. I keep falling down. I keep on hitting the ground. I always get enough to see what's next. Birds don't just fly, they fall down and get up. Nobody learns without getting it wrong. I won't give up, no I won't give in till I reach the end and then I'll start again. No I won't leave, I wanna try everything, I wanna try even though I could fail.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Zootopia Minute podcast, the minute-by-minute podcast where we review everything Zootopia, everyone's favorite award-winning film from 2016. I am your host, Choco, and I just came back from one of the oldest furry cons in the country, for the confusion. Again, still not a furry. And there I caught Con Crud, so I've been out a week with Con Crud. So I must apologize to my co-host who's been waiting to do another episode, but I had to spend a week sick in bed. Yes, and my co-host is, as always,
Simul. I am not sick. I managed to avoid it.
Yeah, lucky you. You didn't have to spend a weekend with a bunch of furries and catch their
thank God, right?
contagious plague. Well, speaking of animal-related stuff, by the time this episode is released, it will be the Chinese Lunar New Year, and it will be the Year of the Pig. So, happy Year of the Pig for everyone who is born on the Year of the Pig. It's actually bad luck for it to be the year of the animal you were born on. I don't know, it's strange superstitions, but for everyone else, happy Year of the Pig.
Except you pig people. Everyone else, have a good year.
Yeah, and actually it's strange because in China as well, so there's a large Muslim majority in West China, and actually it's offensive to celebrate the Year of the Pig, so I guess the Chinese government has cracked down and had the sensitivity sensors to make sure that no TV stations say Year of the Pig or something in Western China.
The
That's
Chinese
really weird.
Government is doing that? I would have expected the other way around. Huh.
Think about it. The Chinese government's run by communists, the most left. Okay, I'm not getting into politics.
All right, so this is the Zootopia podcast where that's all we talk about, nothing else. This minute, guys, is going to be minute 63. And for those of you joining along at home, that means in the movie, it is timestamp 1:03:00 to 1:03:59. And this minute begins right where we left off. Nick and Judy are looking at the traffic cams, and they had just seen Montius getting snatched up by some mysterious timber wolves who basically stuck him in a sack and threw him in the back of their van. And Nick and Judy are watching on the cameras to see where they get taken, and eventually they see that they took an alternate route out of a tunnel through a maintenance gate, and they're driving kind of outside of town, and the last thing we see in the camera is them on a road heading out of town. Then our minute ends on a scene transition where we now are presented with a large spooky building on a waterfall with a gate that says Cliffside in front of it, and the minute ends right as Nick and Judy are sort of peeking over a stone or a big rock to look at that building. So a lot of interesting stuff, actually.
Yeah, and I want to say for everyone out there listening, I want to say thank God Simul just did all that recap of the previous minute, because I'm still sitting here, I'm on the tail end of my Concron whatever flu I have, and I'm looking at the script, and I'm still kind of feeling nauseous just looking at the text. So
let me know if you need to take a break or anything, dude.
I have no idea how to do that. But yes, this is actually a really, really fun minute. I think we say that every minute because it's just so visually beautiful, but it's fun because for anyone who has the Zootopia art concept art book or know the story of the original versions of Zootopia, the spooky cliffside area that we're going to see later in this minute is a carryover from one of the unfinished versions of one of the old working scripts, specifically the dystopian future scenario one. But we also have a really great back and forth interchange between Nick and Judy, and I think for Judy specifically, she finally has a realization, howlers. So, wait, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's right. That's our first bit of dialogue. So right when we jump into the minute, remember, the very last thing that happened in the previous minute is that Nick says, hey, bet you nickel one of these wolves is going to howl. Then they both howl, and he kind of is making a comment about wolves and howling. And then Judy makes that connection. Howlers! Night howlers. That's what Monchis was afraid of. Wolves. The wolves are the night howlers. And if they took Monchis, Nick continues, I bet they took Otterton too. So yeah, it looks like we're finally having a bit of a revelation about what night howlers actually might refer to. So hooray for plot stuff actually happening.
Yeah, well, I want to say this. Aside from wolves, and I guess we can't count domesticated dogs, is there any other animal that howls at night?
Well, foxes don't, clearly, because Nick has this aversion to howling, clearly.
Yeah, coyotes maybe?
Coyotes, I think. You know what it is? What's interesting is I found out that it depends on the breed of dog, but wolves, like an actual wild gray wolf, they don't actually have the regular capability of barking the same way a domestic dog does. That actually came with sort of the domestication process of selective breeding.
Yep.
And, you know, howling is a way for these canines to like communicate over long distances at night and stuff, but you don't really need these. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is like barking evolved specifically because of wolves' interaction with humans.
Yeah, because they need something at our level to communicate with, or they think they're communicating with us.
They're doing their best human impressions.
Yeah, we just think they're cute.
And it comes out as barking. And inversely, a lot of dogs can't howl now, too. They lost that ability.
Yeah, well, yeah, but the gene is still there, so it could be bred back into them.
Yep. It depends on the breed.
So we're moving forward in our grand conspiracy. Of course, we first remember that it was Monchis who said night howlers previously in one of our previous minutes.
Is he the first one to utter that phrase? Is that right?
Yes, it was Monchis, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and of course, Nick. You know the thing where so like obviously predators are seen as not the nicest group in this society. There's a stereotype associated with predators, but it seems even within the predator family, there's stereotypes associated with other ones. Because once again, Nick goes straight into stereotyping again, and he's back talking his fellow predators, wolves.
Yeah, well, that's interesting too, because even amongst predators, there are predators that do serve as prey to larger predators, right? You're not necessarily on either extreme of the food chain, you're somewhere in the middle. There are animals that are top of the food chain, you know, like an orca or a polar bear or something, where they don't have to worry about anything else, but something like a fox does get preyed on, and yeah, maybe by wolves or by something else.
But we see it's kind of his mindset. So we have Nick kind of back talking wolves and saying that's all these dummies do is howl. And of course, the previous minute he's just talking about sheep. You know how all these stereotypes of do they count themselves to sleep and are wolves so fluffy. And of course, when we first meet Nick, he's already assuming Judy's just a dumb bunny. So he has a really like biased view of all these animals he's encountering. And
yeah, I suppose so.
Probably is that upbringing we saw from his horrendous childhood that probably instilled this in him.
Yeah, and that's why it is nice that we did get a little peek into his backstory there, because otherwise it is a little bit of a mystery. Well, this dialogue does continue on. Nick, again, replies, I bet they took Otterton too, referring to the wolves. Judy then says, all we gotta do is find out where they went. And then they start clicking through and switching between different traffic cameras. They're kind of tracing this van that the wolves were driving as it's traveling in these different streets through the Rainforest District. And eventually they see it drive into a tunnel, which says it goes to Tundra Town. It's a 1/4-mile long tunnel. And what's kind of interesting is there's a car. So there's the van enters the tunnel. You see a taxi come in behind and enter the tunnel immediately after the van. And then they switch to the camera at the opposite end of the tunnel in Tundra Town. And the taxi comes out, but the van is nowhere to be seen, which is spooky.
That is actually a spooky thing. You would see that on YouTube. If this was the human world, you would see that automatically posted on YouTube as, spooky ghost car. That
it'd be like one of those top 10 unexplained videos or something.
And then everyone's like, it can't be explained. And all of a sudden, Captain Illusion will say, it's trickery. You just do this and this and this. So it's like, it's
smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
Smoke and mirrors. So Judy also notices this. All we got to do is find out where they went. They check the end of the tunnel. Wait, where'd they go? Then Nick kind of grabs the mouse from Judy and says, if I wanted to avoid surveillance because I was doing something illegal, which I never have, to which Judy kind of smiles and giggles a bit, I would use the maintenance tunnel 6B, which would put them out right here. And then we see the camera transition on the computer. It's now showing the exit of another segment of tunnel, which is presumably the end of maintenance tunnel 6B. And we do see the van emerge from there. So there's a few things here that are kind of funny. It's funny that Nick is making this sort of half joke about not doing illegal things, but he also specifically knows it's maintenance tunnel 6B. Like, he knows these tunnels like the back of his paw, he's got this all worked out in in his various con man dealings.
So it's funny because, again, you have someone who is a literal con man, a con fox, a con artist, working with a cop. And he's just saying, yeah, this is what we do. He's just being sly about it because he does deal in some fishy business. And she's just like kind of playing along with it. It's like, okay, yeah, I know, you sly fox you. So I kind of like the play back and forth. Even if this was not Nick and Judy, it's still like fun banter to see between a cop and a criminal and any other detective-based show or something like that.
Yeah. Well, one other thing that was kind of interesting to me about this whole Maintenance Tunnel 6B thing is if there is a maintenance, and a lot of those tunnels in real life, these highway tunnels do have these side tunnels that are either used for emergencies or just for maintenance access. But if they're not being used for that purpose at the time, they're usually gated off. Like, I don't understand why this maintenance tunnel was just wide open for anyone to drive through. You know, there are things similar to this in the area where I live, but they're always gated off unless specifically it's in use. And, you know, because you can imagine a car that's not totally paying attention where it's going could easily accidentally end up there. So you do physically block it off. So it's just kind of weird that, you know, the Zootopia City officials didn't think to do that. Or maybe these guys have some sort of way of opening the gate. I don't know. Yeah,
well, this is now where we put on our tinfoil hats, because in any other society, in our world, if we saw this on YouTube and then someone brought up the accompanying video of it being through a maintenance tunnel, the first thought we'll have is, ooh, the government's in on it.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good thought, actually. Could be. Maybe the government just left it open on purpose.
Yeah.
That's totally possible. Well, going sort of right along with what you're saying about the exchange between Nick and Judy being a cop, Nick being a con man, and just the interesting dynamic there, Judy then actually goes on to say, well, look at you, junior detective. You know, I think you'd actually make a pretty good cop. And Nick responds kind of, ugh, how dare you? And there's just some chuckling through there. So yeah, an interesting note from Judy. Judy's now saying, you know, this guy who I met, and he basically is a criminal, but he's like a low-level criminal, is actually helping me quite a bit. Like, he's been a huge help so far with, you know, going to the DMV, getting them into places they need to get to, knowing where to go next. He's proven that he is useful. He does have a lot of skills that might work in that capacity.
Yeah, in fact, I think some of the best people to work on detective cases and with police forces are actually reformed criminals. And in fact, you see a lot of criminals do that to get a lighter sentence time in jail, or to even avoid being put on the stand. They would actually help the cops and actually provide a lot of valuable assets. And in fact, they might actually find themselves enjoying it to the point they actually end up joining the police force in cases like that.
That's actually really funny, because essentially that is what Judy's doing, because she's blackmailing him with the tax fraud info, right? But she's doing it off the books. She's doing it in a kind of shady way herself, actually.
That's actually funny. It's kind of something you see in The Wire.
I've still never seen that.
I'm gonna be honest, I've never seen it too, but because I lived in Baltimore, I'm pretend I saw it.
It's one of those things that everyone tells me I have to see. I feel like most people have.
It's the Citizen King of television, yada yada. All right, we're talking about the Citizen King of animated films, and that's Zootopia, man.
Exactly, right. Well, we see this car, the van the wolves are driving, on the traffic cameras here, continue through a few streets, and it does look like that maintenance tunnel did come out in Tundra Town, because it's still kind of snowy. And they're naming the streets they're driving on: Acacia Alley, Ficus Underpass, South Canyon, these just sort of generic road terms. Judy says, yeah, it looks like they're heading out of town. Where does that road go? And then this is kind of interesting. I guess they are headed out of town, because when we finally see where they end up, this giant building we see at the end of the minute, we don't see that through the traffic camera. This is the physical camera of the movie, of the audience watching, has now traveled here because Nick and Judy are there. So maybe they've reached the extent of where the traffic cameras actually have coverage, because I was thinking, like, man, this traffic camera coverage in the city is like super dense. It's very thorough coverage. It looks like you can see basically anywhere. Just not all the way to that destination, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's probably why they picked that, whoever these animals are, that's why they picked that destination as probably their hideout, because it's not covered by the traffic cams.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of where the minute starts to come to an end here. The last kind of thing we see is Judy saying, yep, headed out of town. Where does that road go? And the scene fades, and we see this gate, this big sort of wrought iron gate in front of a building in the distance, kind of overlooking a waterfall. And a sign above the gate says Cliffside. And on either side, there is a statue of a bear and a bull, which is kind of interesting. And then looking at the building itself, the camera kind of zooms in a bit closer, and what we see is this really cool building overlooking a waterfall, like literally built on a rock in the middle of this river, right on top of a waterfall. waterfall. And it's got this cool kind of Art Deco design. I don't know if you noticed that, but that's kind of the vibe I get from it. It looks like an Art Deco building. So something that would have, if this was like real life Earth, it would have been built maybe in like the 20s, 30s, 40s, something like that, probably the 30s.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah. It looks either to me like a hotel or a hospital. Both of those types of locations had a lot of really good Art Deco examples in the real world. There's a famous hotel on a hill overlooking downtown Seattle called the Pacific Medical Center that has a really distinctive Art Deco design. And I think it was originally a VA hospital. Then for a number of years, it was Amazon's headquarters before they moved their campus to a different location downtown. But so that would be my guess, either a hotel or a hospital, but I'm not sure.
It looks more like a hospital to me. Cliffside just screams hospital.
Cliffside, like you're on the verge of this cliff, you're this close to death, but we're gonna save you at this hospital.
And it's very grim looking things. Normally, again, the stereotype is hospitals are grim in fiction.
Yeah, the whole scene has that spooky kind of vibe. You could imagine almost that the building is haunted, the sky is all overcast, everything's really misty.
Oh, and actually, if you do look at the building closely, so there's two types of Art Deco aesthetics. So there's Art Deco that's normally used for the facade of like buildings in financial centers. So downtown areas, these would be the ones used for businesses and hotels. And they have a very, very unique, like, gilded look. Something you'll see out of, like, Great Gatsby or an Ayn Rand novel. But this Art Deco feel, it has what's called, I think it's called concrete or cement minimalism as well. And that's normally more associated with places you want to keep out of the way. So hospitals, insane asylums, and other stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you mean like brutalism?
Brutalism. I think that's the term.
Yeah. The Washington State Convention Center in Seattle is a brutalist design.
Yeah. So during the period when Art Deco was big, you did have brutalism come out of it, but brutalism was never normally in the heart of downtown or where people would go as a attraction. Brutalism was normally saved for like places that need to be simple and sterile. So it does definitely leans more towards like hospital or warehouse or mental asylum, I'm gonna be honest.
Well, if it is a hotel or something, the closest thing it reminds me of would be like the Great Northern Hotel in Twin Peaks.
Ooh.
If you've seen that, which is actually a real place. It's not called that. I think it's called the Salish Lodge, and it's actually above Snoqualmie Falls, which is really close to Seattle. And that's actually where they filmed that in Twin Peaks. But that's what it makes me think of. So here's kind of where we're ending on. This minute does end basically at this point. The very last shot we have is Nick and Judy kind of peeking over a boulder to look at this big Art Deco building, whatever it is. And what's been implied here is that they're no longer in Zootopia, right? Because Judy said it looks like they're headed out of town, and she's not sure where that road goes because evidently the cameras don't go out that far. So are we now to assume that they're like no longer within the city limits of Zootopia? This is just somewhere on the outskirts?
Could be. And that's where brutalism is probably best for. Outskirts of the cities.
Could be, yeah. And like you were saying earlier, if this is a criminal hideout, that would probably be the best kind of place. Although this building itself is fairly conspicuous. It's beautiful, honestly. It looks really cool.
It looks like it's been reappropriated for whatever purpose it's being used for right now.
Yeah.
Like an abandoned building.
Mm-hmm. This also just makes me wonder because evidently we are outside of the city. To me, it seems like Zootopia isn't like a real world city because it's kind of like there's city, and then outside the city, there's nothingness. It's just wilderness and maybe like a few buildings scattered here and there. Whereas, you know, in modern times, most cities, even outside of the limits of the proper big city, there's all these smaller suburbs and more suburban communities.
So the closest I could compare Zootopia to, so I'm going back with because remember when we started the podcast like 2-3 years ago, the theory was it organic, kind of like New York City, or was it more like artificially constructed as a model city?
Planned city.
And I lean towards the theory of planned city, and the closest planned city that Zootopia reminds me of is Columbia, Maryland, which is one of the most famous planned cities in the United States. In fact, it's considered probably the best planned city in the United States, and it's
really
I think it was what Epcot was trying to be. But Columbia, Maryland, is made up in spokes, and each neighborhood is kind of branches
a wedge
off.
on a wheel.
Yeah, there are like 10 neighborhoods, but each neighborhood is its own like unique enclosed circuit circular structure. And once you get outside, you can either get connected to another neighborhood or you automatically just go straight into like the woody wilderness of the Appalachians. It's basically that. It's like literally like Epcot, just right in the middle of a forest, which is kind of what Zootopia seems like.
That is interesting, yeah. It's funny because you're saying it's called Columbia and it's in Maryland, and right nearby there's the District of Columbia, and Washington, D.C. is also a planned city.
Yeah, well, I think they purposely...
At least it started that way, right? They've deviated from that now, but...
So actually I read a book about it because it's history of Maryland and other places interest me. But I was reading a book about the city, and that was like one of the first things that brought up, like, oh, we're going to call ourselves Columbia, but, you know, there's the District of Columbia, there's Columbia, Ohio. Do we really want to do it? And it's like, yes, because the ideal city in American folklore is Columbia. So we have to create our modern Columbia. We want to be the Columbia, which is why they chose that name.
Right, because that word comes from Christopher Columbus, and the name Columbia is often used as a personification of America.
Yeah, the idea of manifest destiny and specifically the Gilded Age of America, where America is the new Rome, and that's why they kept that name, because we don't want to use the name Rome, but our equivalent to the new Rome would be the ideal city of Columbia.
Mm-hmm. Cool things to think about, yeah. Well, it's been an interesting minute. I can't wait to see what is going to happen at this building, whatever it is Nick and Judy are looking over at. This, to me, feels like the plot is really starting to push into high gear here, so I'm really excited to see what happens in the next few minutes.
Yeah, and I guess before we close out, we had some big news that popped out between the time we're recording this episode and our last episode. And that news is the Disney Shanghai Park has announced that they were building a Zootopia land.
Yes, finally someone's doing it. Of course, it's in China, where I can't visit.
Or I can't visit either. Like, none of us can visit China. Just like, but the fact, though, Simul and I, we've been talking about this for as long as we've been fans of Zootopia, and almost all my Zootopia friends, we've been talking about this. We have always said the perfect thing to build an Animal Kingdom, because Animal Kingdom is the largest Disney park by area, but has very few attractions inside there. Like, you shouldn't be building Pandora, which is not even a Disney property. You should be building Zootopia Land. We should be building Zootopia Land in Animal Kingdom. Now we finally get a Zootopia Land, and it's not in Animal Kingdom, but it's at a Disney park. So what we know so far, because at first it was leaked as a rumor, and now it's been officially confirmed, is that this park has been in the works for at least a year now. It's going to be confirmed for Shanghai Disneyland. It's going to feature a lot of state-of-the-art rides and attractions. There's been a concept art piece that's been leaked, and we see what looks like the downtown streets. Instead of looking downtown through Main Street, you're looking downtown through Zootopia's downtown. There are billboards with images of gazelle, fake clothing ads with animals on it. We see people walking around with bunny ears and gazelle horns on their heads. We see what looks like a police car, and in front of the police car is a model of Nick and Judy. There's also said that there will be giant, models of the elephant popsicles that people could stand by. I'm not sure if they're going to be for sale,
Awesome.
But they're going to be there. The sad news is it seems like for previous Disney dealings with the Chinese parks, so if you guys don't know, Disney has 100% control of all their American parks, and they finally just got control of their European park, Disneyland Paris. But their East Asian holdings, the ones in Tokyo, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, are actually 50% owned by different companies. So they don't have complete control. Essentially, they're licensing the Disney name, brand, and IP, and licensing the Imagineers over to the local park companies or governments of China and Japan. So part of that deal, specifically with the Chinese parks, is that whatever new ride or new attraction they build with the Chinese parks, they have exclusive rights for that for 5 years before it comes to American park. So whatever they make, we're probably not going to see it come to Animal Kingdom or one of the American parks for another 5 years, which is sad, but it might be fun to go. My friend, actually at the FurryCon I was at just the last weekend, I met my Nick Wilde friend from Disneyland. He was there with his boyfriend, and we were chatting because he just actually left his job at Disney, so he's no longer a Disney employee, but he said, yeah, I'm willing to put on the Nick Wilde outfit again if I could actually go to the park. Seems like everyone wants to go.
There you go. Well, I guess if anyone in China is listening to this podcast, we do envy you. We want our own Zootopia Land.
Yeah, actually, if we have any fans of ours in China, please send us fan mail, because I'm actually curious if we have any Chinese fans there.
We'll see.
And actually, what a good coincidence. If we do have Chinese fans, Happy New Year's to you. Happy Chinese New Year.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, I think think that's going to be about it for this episode of Zootopia Minute. If you did enjoy the podcast, you can go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube, like this video, share it with your friends. You can also follow us on Twitter at Zootopia Minute, like us on Facebook, and if you have anything you'd like to let us know, you can always email us at zootopiaminute@gmail.com. And with that, guys, we're going to wrap it up here. Happy Lunar New Year, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, everybody. Happy Year of the Pig.
Bye-bye.